We have an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. and Ilias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another special episode of Researchers on a Mission. That's right, ROAM. I am your host, Dr. J, and of course we have an incredible show for you today. Back by popular demand, we have the founding father of the ancient astronaut theory, the man who started a true revolution, and someone who, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be doing this today. And that one and only person is Mr. Erich Von Daniken. Mr. Von Daniken, it is a pleasure to have you back.
Well, it is a pleasure and an honor for me to talk to you.
It's always been a pleasure for me, especially since I've been reading your book. Literally, I grew up on Chariots of the Gods. And that's what inspired me to take a good look at the Bible and realize, are these angels that Ezekiel's talking about with flaming shields and four heads, could they be, instead of angelic beings, flesh and blood extraterrestrials? And I went down the same path. And that's what I wanted to go and ask you first. When did you first realize that what was in the Bible was not necessarily angelic beings, but actual extraterrestrials?
You see, I was educated in Switzerland in a boarding school, and it was a Catholic boarding school led by Jesuits. And of course, as a young man, I was a deep believer in God. By the way, I'm still a believer in God, but the belief has changed. But for me, when I was about 16 and 17 years old, God had to have a few minimum qualities. For example, God would never make a mistake, or God would be out of time. God would not need to make an experiment, and then he has to wait the result. He knows it in advance. Or of course, God would never use some vehicle to move from point A to point B. God is all over. So all these were qualities of God's which I had in my head as a 16-year-old boy. Now in this boarding school, we had to translate parts of the Bible from Greek to Latin, from Latin to German. And then I realized that the God of the Bible does not have these qualities. The God of the Bible made mistakes. He made experience. He didn't know the answer. And he used vehicles to go from point A to point B. So the result were doubts in my own Catholic educations. I simply wanted to find out if other communities in antiquity have similar stories than we know them from the Christian Jewish history. So that was the beginning. I was 16 years ago. In the meantime, I'm 80 years old. So that's quite some time in the past.
64 years, and you've made a startling revelation 64 years ago that to this day is being followed. As a matter of fact, everybody knows this. A famous television show in America, probably around the world, is based solely on your work, Ancient Aliens. How do you feel that your work is now continued to be developed and researched by people who have looked up to you and look at you as their idol and as the person as inspiration?
Of course, it makes me very, very proud. On the other hand, I am still criticized, which is normal. I mean, when someone comes up with a crazy idea like Erich von Daniken, he has to accept that he is criticized. So concerning Ancient Aliens, in the meantime, this Ancient Aliens TV series has 100, it's a series altogether, they have 100 continuations. 100, this is fantastic. This is like some 10 or 15 years ago, the X-Files. And Ancient Aliens is going all over the world. And of course, I love it. It's done very, very great.
One thing I really enjoy, and I know everybody out there listening knows this, when I was watching a documentary or anything about UFOs or aliens in the 80s, for every 1 minute you would see about the extraterrestrials, you'd see 2 minutes of a debunker. Then in the 90s, it'd be 1 minute and 1 minute. 1 minute alien, 1 minute debunker. Now, on Ancient Aliens and other shows, which are on every major network, there is zero debunking. It is purely giving you the facts and letting you come to your own conclusions. So as a society, we're moving far closer to what you discovered 64 years ago.
Yeah. And again, I'm happy about this. You see, some 65 years ago, I published some impossible things. Well, Chariots of the Gods was on the German market in 1968, so that's about 45 years or something like this ago. And there, for example, I said that space travel between the stars, from star to star, will be possible. At that time, every normal scientist said, this is all nonsense. You know, from star to star, there's a distance of light years, and there is absolutely no technology to reach these light years. In the meantime, we see it is possible. Or I said, extraterrestrial were here, and they made an artificial mutation with some of our ancestors. So, on the one part, we are the product of evolution, definitely, but not only. There was a mixture at some time. So, 45 years ago, I was crashed down. See, this is completely rubbish what Erich von Daniken says, because it is not possible to make artificial mutations. In the meantime, we do it, of course. So there were so many things which I wrote in 1968, which in the meantime have become reality. And I'm happy about it. So we continue to search, and we will never end.
I'm very glad that the I told you so moment is finally coming. Obviously, you've had an uphill battle. 1968 and the 70s were far different than now. Now it's more accepting. I remember when I was in school, we were told there's no such thing as planets outside of our solar system. Now, there are over 5,000 planets that resemble Earth that we found already. Let me tell you this, I mentioned this off air. This is breaking news. January 18th, 2015, recently, NASA, this is the headline, NASA confirms extraterrestrial life does exist on other planets. Now, they didn't say they found it, but the article goes on to mention that they confirm that they believe without a doubt that there exists extraterrestrial life. They're not saying intelligent life, but the fact that life is somewhere else, clearly, as we mentioned, it can evolve, and therefore the fact that there has to be intelligent life is almost an absolute positive now. What do you think of this article?
I'm happy about it, but of course there is intelligent life out there too, because this intelligent life was on Earth some thousands of years ago, and I can prove that we have been visited by extraterrestrials. That means they were intelligent. They had space travel. And how can you prove such a thing? Look, in the beginning, some 10,000, 20,000 years ago, our Stone Age ancestors were seen from a technological point primitives. So they had no tools and nothing. And they were afraid of nature. So the beginning of the religions were always natural religions. But then of a sudden, some so-called gods have come down from the clouds. We can prove this because we have thousands of cave paintings and cave engravings, which are 10,000 years old, were all around the world. They show the similar things. Now, how can you make a difference between the so-called gods, the extraterrestrials, and the gods in nature? You see, the extraterrestrials, they were talking. They gave information. They chose a few of our primitive Stone Age people at that time. They teach them in language. They teach them in astronomy. They clearly said, for example, man, look out of the window. Do you see this little light there? You humans, you call the light moon. But in reality, the moon has no light. The moon receives his light from your sun. And then he explained them the moon dates later, the calendar, etc. All this means information was coming from up to down to us. And nature, an earthquake, a trembling, a lightning does not give scientific information. So we can be absolutely sure we have been visited by beings from outer space, and of course they must have been intelligent.
I absolutely agree. And one thing I love about what you just said is there are civilizations from thousands of years ago that there was no possible way they could be connected. For instance, South America and Egypt. They were not talking to each other. They were not communicating, yet they were building similar structures. And all of them talked about wisdom from the sky people. So everything you just said is exactly true. Now, what did you feel like when you arrived in South America, saw things such as pyramids similar to Egypt and the Nazca lines?
Well, Nazca is one of the biggest miracles, and for some scientists, it is still a miracle. And of course, Nazca has open questions. First, that the public knows what we are talking about. Nazca is a desert, and Nazca lies about 500 kilometers south of Lima in Peru. Now, when you are down on the desert, then you see just nothing. It's a desert like all the other deserts with sand and small brown stones. Soon as you fly over the desert, of a sudden you see gigantic figures in the desert. Down there you see something like an ape, then a flower, you see a fish, you see something like a labyrinth, etc. Now you go higher and higher into the air, and of a sudden you see gigantic lines. The lines start abruptly, they end abruptly, so you can compare them with airstrips. They look like airstrips. By the way, I never said these are airstrips, but I always said they look from the air like airstrips. And there are hundreds of them. So in the course of history, we have at least 30 theories concerning Nazca, what all this was. And you can really disprove every of the theories. Now in the last 2 years, and by the way, what I say now was paid by the Erich von Daniken Foundation. In the last 2 and 3 years, the University of Dresden in Germany made some exact measurements in Nazca. I have asked them, please go out to the desert and find out, is there something not reasonable, something which we cannot explain? Is there some mineral, or can you measure, differentiate in the magnetic field, etc.? And the result is absolutely astonishing. We have some of these lines where there are strong magnetic fields under the line, in the ground. And also, they found a lot of things like, for example, arsenium, which is not normal to be there. So scientific measurements, modern scientific measurements, prove that something in Nazca is wrong. Now we still have to find what is it and why is it like that. But the fact that something is wrong is scientifically clearly provable.
One thing I love about Nazca is, of course, like you mentioned, the different shapes. You have one that looks like a monkey. You have one that looks like a spider. Then you have clearly one that looks like a humanoid, possibly an extraterrestrial. And then, as you mentioned, others that look like landing strips. Do you think that the landing strips, if they were in fact landing strips, were created by extraterrestrials, whereas the other things such as the monkey and the spider were created by humans to please the extraterrestrials?
You see, I have published a theory, and theory means always you don't have a final proof for it. You look for indications to support your theory. My basic idea was, at some time, deep in the past, a mother spaceship was surrounding our planet. This is not a speculation because this is handed down in different holy books. Now, this mother spaceship, they were looking for some kind of energy, raw material. We don't know what they were looking for. But when you have a spaceship which is 100 years on the way, you need some energy. So they were measuring on our planet, where do we find energy? They found the plain of Nazca. The plain of Nazca in Peru and south of the plain of Nazca is full of raw material. Still, today, it's the biggest mine in Peru. All kind of raw material, including uranium. So they measured this from the orbit. Now they sent something down, maybe it was just a satellite or a robot or whatever. They sent it down to the plain of Nazca because they realized that there were no people, so nobody would be disturbed. Now something like a robot or a robot spaceship or something like a space shuttle, never a mother spaceship, just a smaller vehicle, came down and made a landing on the desert of Nazca. Of course, there was no landing strip there. Nobody was there to construct a landing strip. A space shuttle does not need a landing strip. Maybe they came to a standstill just by something like an air cushion or so. Now the robot made exact measurements for their raw material, and then the robot started again. And on the desert, what was left was a small line, just a line because the robot created this line by blowing away sand and little stones and so. Now some of the natives may have observed that something from the sky had come down to the earth. The natives came out in the desert and they see this line of blown away sand and stones and so. And now they start to whisper, the gods made that line. They gave us a sign. And now the natives start to make lines to the north and south and east and west, large and small one, signs to for all generations, because this was going on for more than one generation. Of course, the natives always waited that the gods should return, but they did not return. And one day a priest had a great idea. Priests often have great ideas, and said, we must show them that we are waiting them. We must show them, these sky people, that we have offerings for them. And now the natives start to create gigantic figures in the ground, like spiders and apes and fishes, etc. So this was my basic idea. Of course, I cannot prove it, but what we know, as I said before, something in Nazca is wrong, because some mountains in Nazca are cut off, completely cut off. There is no top of the mountain. Somebody was taking something away, like raw material. And as I said before, in the ground we find extreme changings of the magnetic field. So something was going on there.
Obviously, Nazca has very fertile land, and as you mentioned, so many materials that could be used for various purposes. There are clearly other parts around the world that these extraterrestrials were very interested. What other countries and civilizations did you find that had similarities to the resources that the plains of Nazca had?
Well, one of the things which we can prove is Pumapunku. Pumapunku is in the highland of Bolivia, about 4,000 meters high. And Pumapunku is a temple just very close to another big temple called Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku. Now there you see stone blocks. They are cut absolutely precisely, and you see small grooves in these stone blocks. Now the stone blocks are made out of andesite. Andesite is a hard stone like granite. Some of these stone blocks were definitely moved together to make a gigantic platform. And one of the stone blocks weighs about 80 tons. Other stone blocks, and you clearly can prove this, are prefabricated. That means like a Lego game, you can put the blocks together, and when you have them together, you create a wall. Now, officially, we say all of this was done in Stone Age time. And in Stone Age time, up there in the highland of Bolivia, the Aymara Indians were living. But the Aymara Indians were Stone Age people. They had absolutely no possibility to polish, to cut a block in such a precise way as we can prove it in Pumapunku. They had no planning to make prefabricated blocks, but there are prefabricated blocks. There were no tool, because you need a tool which is harder than granite. Otherwise, you cannot make a groove into a tool, and the groove just a few millimeters deep, absolutely precise. So something technologically was going on up there in Stone Age time. About 400 years ago, the Spanish conquerors arrived to Pumapunku, and they were standing before these gigantic stone blocks. And the natives were there too. including the ruler at that time, an Inca ruler. And the Spanish asked the natives and the Inca ruler, what is this? Not even we from Spain, we would be able to create something like this. And the ruler of the Inca said, we did not make this. It was the gods who made it in one simple night. Now, which gods again? Again, I came back. We have a mother spaceship in orbit. From the mother spaceship, smaller vehicle came down. These extraterrestrials, they are looked by the natives like gods. Now, of course, they are not gods. They just are called the gods. And they behave themselves like today's ethnologists would do. They watch and teach, and they make their photographs of a few natives. Of course, the extraterrestrials, they have their equipment. Today, our ethnologists, they have their equipment like photo apparates. They have all kind of technological equipment. Now, you do not want to bear along this equipment all the time with you. It's heavy. So you make something like a simple base camp. When our mountain climbers, they go to the Himalaya, they have base camps. In the base camps, you deposit your equipment which you do not need on the top of the mountain. The same thing for extraterrestrials. With their technology, they made a base camp where they deposited their high technology equipment so that it could not be destroyed neither by the animals or by the natures. After a few months, their work was done, they disappeared. They took their stuff with them again. And the rest was the base camp. And only now the natives came and stand before these walls and before these stone blocks and say, this was done by the gods. Now again, the natives are waiting that the gods return. And now the natives start to construct a temple. So in Pumapunku, you can clearly differentiate between two technologies. One is a technology out of Stone Age time, which was not able to have been made by the Aymara Indians. The next are temples, normal temples, which were definitely constructed by the natives. So there is something that you can prove. Absolutely impossible for Stone Age people to move and cut these blocks up there.
And something with these blocks, some of them are so precise when they're put together, you can't even put a human hair. And one thing that I may add, you mentioned these 80-ton blocks. Some of these blocks and carvings that are made, we can't even produce today with today's technology. It is physically impossible. So when skeptics try to tell you that we made it thousands of years ago, and yet you have current engineers who say we can't even make it now, obviously we know where we stand on the debate, but what do you tell those skeptics when they can't even make it today?
Well, mostly I invite them, come to my office. In my office, I have about 200,000 pictures, which I made all over the world. For example, I often have archaeologists, and we have a discussion about Nazca in Peru. And then I show them, I have 3,000 pictures about Nazca in Peru. And they say, Erich, this is not Nazca. I say, I'm sorry, this is all Nazca. I made these photos some 20, some 30 years ago, in the early morning, in the evening, etc. The same thing with Pumapunku. We have hundreds of photos which we made in detail. So you can prove the cutting, you can prove the grooves, you can prove that all these blocks fit together like a Lego stone. And then the critics say, well, we didn't know that. We didn't knew about these pictures. We just knew about Nazca or Pumapunku from television. And television is never enough. So you have to go to the subject and to control it.
Currently, a lot of people are making a lot of raves and fuss, and in a good way, about this newly found location in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. What do you know about that?
Of course, I was shortly there. Today, there is not too much to see. You see something like a circle. You could compare it to Stonehenge in England. But the monolites are not cut like Stonehenge. They have On the top, there is another monolith. Now, anyhow, there is not only one of these circles, there are many of them. So I say 4 or 5. We don't know today how many, because we only discovered about 3 or 4 today. And all this was made, according to clear archaeological dating, at least 8,000 BC. So seen from today, it makes 10,000 BC. On some of these stone blocks, you see engravings again of animals and strange, some sort of, you could say, it looks like a character or like a writing. Now, 10,000 BC, in normal archaeology, this is just primitive Stone Age. Nobody was able to make it. And why have they done it? Why have they done it there? Why so many circles next to one other? And by the way, they covered their own circle by themselves. So it was not the thousands of years the sand was coming and they were under the ground. They did it by themselves. They put sand over the block. Now why? And the question is, why exactly here? Now, Göbekli Tepe is very close. It's only about 10 kilometers from today's city, which is called Sanilufla. And that was the home of Abraham. Abraham, the biblical father of Abraham. And what nobody knows, Abraham was taken into a spacecraft. This he describes himself. He describes it in a writing which was found along the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's called the Abraham Apocryphic. There he says that 2 beings descended from the sky. And he realizes clear, these were not humans. I have never seen beings like this on earth. He said they had the breast, not the breast of human. These 2 beings then took him up over the earth. He describes how the earth looks from a satellite. And then he describes there was something like gigantic houses which glittered like crystal. They went into these houses. Then he clearly he says, I wish to fall downward to earth. The high place on which we stood always moved upwards and downwards and upwards and downwards. Once I saw our Earth, the planet Earth, up, and then I saw the planet Earth down, which means he is in a spacecraft which turns around its own axis. And every spacecraft does this in an orbit, because by turning around your own axis, due to the centrifugal force, you create an artificial gravity. But nobody could have known this in Stone Age time. Now, what has it to do with Göbekli Tepe? It's only 8 kilometers away. I guess that the natives had seen how Abraham was taken up into the sky. And by the way, Abraham, they brought him back, of course, again to earth. And now they wanted to do something for the gods. They saw that maybe the gods moved from a certain place with fire and smoke and whatever. And they wanted to do something that the gods feel well on this planet. So this could be the beginning of Göbekli Tepe 10,000 years ago, because the fact is, Abraham was taken into space. He describes it himself in the I form, that means the first form, in the Abraham Apocryphic, which nobody knows, by the way.
I'm glad you mentioned Abraham, and I'm going to come back to him in a second. I just want to make one quick comment on Göbekli Tepe. The fact is, before, everyone used to consider ancient Sumer or Sumeria as the first civilization, but clearly now we have something that predates ancient Sumer by several thousand years. And as you said, 8,000 BC, which is 10,000 years ago. And the fact that it has a biblical reference being so close to where Abraham had his encounter just makes it that much more plausible with every other theory that's come across because of the ancient astronaut theory. Now, I'm glad you brought up Abraham, because I was hoping we could talk about a couple more of these extraterrestrial encounters that are in the Bible, because clearly Old Testament, New Testament, they're all over the place.
That's true. I mean, the best case which everyone can control very easy because everyone has a Bible at all is the biblical prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel you find on the end of the Old Testament, so the end of the Bible. And Ezekiel clearly describes that he saw a vehicle coming down from the cloud. And he does not only describe the vehicle, how it looked like, he even describes the noise which the vehicle made. He compares the noise with the thundering of a waterfall. Then this flying vehicle came to a standstill. Sand is blown up. Ezekiel, in the beginning, he believes that must be God. And then he realized this is not God. And Ezekiel starts to describe in every detail what he sees. He describes the legs. He describes the wings. He describes the wheel. He describes all kinds of things. Of course, in his time, with his words. Ezekiel, in his time, had no words in technology. He could not say, for example, well, this was a helicopter. He could not explain this was an engine. He said they moved by themselves. There must be a moving soul, something inside. Now, to make it short, Ezekiel clearly described something what we would today describe as a space vehicle. And the text of Ezekiel was controlled and checked forward and backward by a leading NASA engineer. His name was Joseph Blumrich. He died in the meantime. And he came up with the book. In America, it's called The Spaceship of Ezekiel. And there he took Ezekiel word by word, every phrase, and he clearly reconstructed the vehicle which Ezekiel saw. And there is no doubt that it was a technical vehicle. Again, to replay, I was in a boarding school led by Jesuits, and we at that time, a long time ago, we were talking about Ezekiel too. And our professors in theology said, well, Ezekiel had a vision. He saw the Almighty God sitting on his throne and moving around. Again, I said, I cannot imagine a God which moves a vehicle which makes noise, sand is blowing up, a vehicle to go from point A to point B. My God is omnipotent, is all over. And there are a lot of discrepancies between the theological understanding and my understanding. And in the meantime, I think most of the scientists who really control it came closer to my point of view. Ezekiel described something which we would call a space vehicle or space shuttle.
I would definitely have to agree with you. I am also Christian, Greek Orthodox for that fact. How can my God be using technology? How can my God be sending ships? Obviously, if our God, the powerful God, would want to do something, it would be instantaneous. It wouldn't be, like you said, it would be no noise. There would be no beings. There would be, if they want a wall to tremble, there wouldn't be a chariot with a light flying to it or a trumpet. It would just happen. And that's why all these inconsistencies and discrepancies always got my curiosity. Now, Moses is another person some people say had extraterrestrial encounters. Do you know anything about that?
Well, of course. I mean, Moses, in the book of Moses, there are so many things which clearly point to extraterrestrial. There is this angel which works before the Israelites, and this angel is defending them. In some cases in the book of Moses, this angel makes war and destroys and kills the enemies, etc. And one thing here is for me important. If we are looking the old texts in the way I do or we do, we never lose God. I am still a deep believer in God. I am still one of these figures who pray every evening. And it's easy to understand. I mean, if our planet was visited by extraterrestrials some thousands of years ago, the next question is, where did these extraterrestrials come from? What is their evolution? Now you can say, well, they were visited by other extraterrestrials. All right, and where did the others come from? Etc., etc. You can go on for billions of years. It doesn't matter. At the end, you arrive at the starting point where in every respect you say with the religions, here is God. Here is the beginning. you never lose God when you deal with extraterrestrials, when you come up with idea that Moses, for example, he did not talk to God, he talked to an extraterrestrial. By the way, Moses never saw the face of his leading extraterrestrial. He just saw the back. Moses described always the noise which the vehicle made when he came back. In the first book of Moses, Moses 1:6, he says that the sons of the gods had sex with the humans. I'm sorry, what sons of the gods had sex? In some Bible translations, it said, well, these are the fallen angels. What fallen angels have sex with the humans? In another part, the God, in the Moses book, commands to Moses, before the Lord descends on the mountain, Moses has to construct a gate around the mountain so that the people would not come close by, otherwise the people would be destroyed. So Moses constructs the gate, and the Israelites are far away. And then the Lord descends on the mountain with smoke, fire, loud noise, trembling, etc. Everyone was afraid. Again, my God would never need to construct first a gate for protection. So it was technology, and it is all misunderstood by our great religions, and I mean the Jewish religion, our Christian religion, even the Muslim religion, because they have the same story concerning Moses, Abraham, etc., as we have. It is all a misunderstanding. It was technology and not spiritual.
I'm really glad that you keep your faith. And let me throw in an interesting fact. I recently interviewed Ted Peters. He's a Lutheran pastor, and he teaches theology in Berkeley, California. He did a poll. He was a MUFON state director in Louisiana. He did a poll asking people if they were to find out that extraterrestrials have been visiting us, would it affect their faith? All the religions, Christianity, Judaism, Muslim, Buddhists, all of them said they not only would they not be affected with their faith, their faith may grow stronger. The only group that said that the faith would be decreased or affected by extraterrestrials were the atheists. And they said that the other people with religious beliefs would lose their faith. So it was ironic because the people who have, the people really with funny. Faith, yeah, exactly, the people with faith said that their faith would get stronger and not change. But the people that don't have faith said, yeah, the other guys with faith are going to get...
that's really funny. It's really, it's very interesting that I hear this. Thank you.
It really is. Now, let's talk about Greece for a second, because obviously the Greek gods, Roman gods, obviously they were, I would think, the same thing. These were flesh and blood extraterrestrials rather than angelic holy beings that took advantage of a race that was not have as much wisdom as they did, and essentially controlled them. What do you know about the Greek gods and the Roman gods?
I have written a book about the Greek gods. I don't know the English title at the moment. And anyhow, Greek mythology is full of sensations, and ancient Greek is much older than archaeologists believe. I think that ancient Greece is older than ancient Egypt. Now, for example, there is one place in Greece which every tourist should visit, is Delphi. Now, Delphi is the place of Apollon. Apollon was the son of Zeus. Now, Apollo did not just by coincidence made a landing in Delphi. He saw some people there, and he wanted to help them and to educate them. Again, like an ethnologist would do, study a group of humans. So Apollo descended to a place which today is called Delphi. Now, Delphi is the center of a geometrical pattern. Every old Greek place, I mean the big old Greek place like Delphi, Nemea, etc., they are all linked together in the same distance with the same angles. Now, Plato was a Greek philosopher, and Plato wrote about this Greek geometry and said this comes from antiquity, from the gods. So in Greece we had brilliant mathematicians, for example, like Euclid. But all this geometrical pattern, that means that all the old Greek archaeological places are linked together in the same distance is older than Euclid, older than Pythagoras, older than Plato. So it comes back from the time of the gods. And here again, I ask myself, why have these so-called gods ordered to our primitive Stone Age human at that time, okay, you want to adore us, you want to make a temple, you want to make something in our honor, great, we accept it. Please construct it at that point, and the next temple at that point, and the next temple at that point. Meaning, all these temples have the same distance from one to the other. But our natives, Stone Age people, could not understand what was going on. They knew nothing about geometry. The gods did it because they knew exactly. Some thousands and thousands of years ago, the followers of the ancient Greek, they are able to fly. They will fly over the land of Greece. They will of a sudden realize that all these old places are linked together in the same distance and the same angle. And now the people in the future will start to ask questions. What is this? How is this possible? How could the ancient Greeks have made the same distance between some temple on the mainland of Greece and another temple not on the mainland of some of the islands of Greece? So the people in the future start to ask questions. Is this a high civilization before our civilization, or were they extraterrestrials? Why have they done this? That's exactly the situation we have today. We have the question now, and now we should go with scientific methods and look, where is the proof? Because I am sure these ancient gods of Greece, they have just not left our planet without proof. Something is somewhere in the ground, which clearly says we were here from that and that solar system with that and that speed, with that and that technology, we found that and that here, we will return, etc., etc., etc. There's something like a time capsule somewhere, and we have to find it.
I think with the excavations and the fact that people are finally embracing this theory, and this theory may in fact end up being the truth, which is what you believed and I believed for a very long time. Now, speaking of the distances, I'm going to switch now to Egypt, because this is a very startling fact that you have definitely written on. The way that the temples or the Great Pyramids of Giza are aligned, they're aligned with the star system of Sirius, yet at the time of their civilization, they couldn't even know about the star system, let alone see it and align their temples and pyramids with it.
And not only this, you see, archaeology believes that the Great Pyramid was constructed by a guy with the name of Cheops. And there are only very few indications which point to Cheops. Few indications which are 2 or 3 writings. And these writings can well be from Cheops' time, but Cheops could have falsificated. The pyramid was there already long time ago, before Cheops. How do I come to this idea? We have ancient Arabian writers, like, for example, Ibrahim al-Makrizi. No one in archaeology knows him. Or Abdul al-Mas'udi. All these Egyptian writers, they were brilliant. They have written that the Great Pyramid was constructed before the Great Flood by a ruler with the name of Saurit. And they say Saurit is the same which the Hebrew call Enoch and the Greek call Hermes. So Hermes, Enoch, Saurit are the same figure, and he was the constructor of the Great Flood. Now Enoch was one of the children taught by the extraterrestrial. There is a whole book of Enoch. It comes from old Ethiopia. And in the book of Enoch, Enoch writes himself in the first person. What happened at that time? Like Abraham, by the way. Enoch in the Bible is the 7th patriarch before the Great Flood. After Enoch, there are only 3 more to Noah, and then the Great Flood came. Now, Enoch describes that he was up in the sky. He knows the names of the extraterrestrials. The names of 36 extraterrestrials are in the Ethiopian book of Enoch. And no archaeologists have any idea of it. So we even know what they have done. They teach Enoch in every detail, in astronomy, in geometry, etc. Enoch has written more than 300 books. That's what he says himself to his son Methuselah. And before Enoch disappears with the gods in a fiery chariot into the heaven. Before he goes, he gives these 300 books to his son Methuselah. And he said, keep these books in a place which could not be destroyed, because after the flood, humanity needs these proofs. So keep these books. Now coming back to old Arabian writers, Ibrahim Abdul al-Makrizi says that Enoch created the Great Pyramid. And in the pyramid and under the pyramid, there are books of everything in science which we should know. In the meantime, by modern electronic measurings, we know that in the pyramid there are much more shafts and rooms than we ever thought before. We know even some of these rooms. We can clearly localize them. We know also some of these shafts. I have photographs which robots made from 2 of these shafts. So if we know it, the critics will ask, why don't we go in there? It's not possible. The shafts have a side length of about 14 centimeters. Nobody can climb in there. So you need modern equipment. Whoever planned the Great Pyramid thousands and thousands of years ago knew exactly that only a high-tech society would be able to localize these books and these rooms. No one else during the thousands of years in the past could destroy it. And that's exactly going back to Enoch and the Arabian writings.
And that's just like you said about the time capsule of the proof that they've been sitting on. If we can finally get to it, now that we're a high technology society, we are getting there. And speaking of Egypt, one thing that always fascinated me are the artifacts. There's clearly this very famous one that looks like the modern day space shuttle. Then there's another one, an inscription that looks like a helicopter. What do you make of these artifacts that are very resembling so vividly current technology?
Well, what you are talking is a temple which is in Abydos. And in Abydos, on one of these stone blocks of the ceiling, you see some pictures which resemble to a helicopter or to a tank or so. But I guess this is a misunderstanding, because we know that these inscriptions over there were, overcovered again by new inscriptions. And it just looks like, I would not say it is a helicopter. Also, it gives you the impression that it looks like a helicopter. If we would have something like this in the past, like helicopter, we should find more of them. Not only in Abydos, on this one stone. There should be other pictures of it. But in the pyramids, in the old pyramids, for example, Unas, that's the 3rd dynasty, or the 5th dynasty, the 4th, the 5th dynasty, they all had in their graves inscriptions. And these inscriptions today we call the pyramid texts. And many of these pyramid texts absolutely clearly say, "Oh Pharaoh, God took me up into the sky. I was flying over my land. I was looking down at my people." In archaeology, they always think that these are just dreams, meaning a life after death. But that's not the fact. The fact is, like Ezekiel, they are describing not only they are flying over the land, they are describing the noise, the thundering, the smoke, the fire comes up, etc. And just in newest time, what I say now is not known in the English world. We have a German translation of a book which is called Encheduanna. Encheduanna was a Sumerian priest living about 4,300 years in Sumer, in ancient Sumer. And she was able to write, and she put some of her writing on a temple wall in Ur, ancient Ur. And today, a man with the name is Dr. Professor Burgard, he's a Sumerologian, translated these old texts from Sumerian cuneiform writings to German and English. but the book is not on the market in English. And it's absolutely crazy. This priest, Encheduana, clearly says that the gods have come down with landing vehicles, that they were starting at certain point, going up to the sky, that around the earth there was something like a big vehicle. So we have modern translations. The situation will change. And the situation in archaeology and in interpretation will change. And this is all important because the so-called gods, the extraterrestrials, some thousands of years, they have promised to return one day. And it's time that we, the modern human race, start to be prepared for this. Otherwise, we would be completely shocked.
That's right. We have to be prepared, and we have to accept the fact that we are not alone, and to think that we are alone in this vast universe that God created with billions of planets in our solar system, with billions of planets in our galaxy, and billions of stars with all these planets and all these galaxies above that. It would be arrogant to think so. Now, I know we only have a few more minutes left, so just a couple more questions. But I'm glad you mentioned the return, because now I want to ask you about current UFOs. Do you think that the ones that were visiting us thousands of years ago are monitoring us and getting ready for their return? Or
yes,
do you think
I really think so. By the way, long time, for decades, I was not a very good friend of the UFO case. I knew many people, wonderful people, who saw something in the air and believed it's a UFO, and then we found some, scientific explanation and so on. Also, in some of the old UFO literature, you find stories which really can't be true. But in the meantime, I have changed my opinion completely. Some 15 years ago, I met Professor Dr. John Mack. Mack was publishing a book about abductions, and we met together 3 times, and I had to completely change my opinion. Mack clearly proved that some of the humans, they have implantates. So what technology is implantating some little objects into the skin of our humans? I really believe we are under observation again. Someone is watching us. Someone is learning our languages. Someone is asking themselves, could we be a danger? What kind of weapons do we have? What kind of bacteria? What kind of virus, etc.? Somebody is observing us. I'm sure about this in the meantime.
And they're probably getting ready for their return. Now, I know in May you are going to be joining us back in the United States, specifically at Joshua Tree outside of Palm Springs, about 100 miles away from Los Angeles, for Contact in the Desert. Everybody's truly excited to see you once again. What, in a brief sentence, basically, what will you be bringing to show everybody this time? Essentially, what is your lecture going to be this year?
Well, to my knowledge, I have at least 3 lectures. And of course, I always show the best arguments. The one thing what we can show optically. We have computer animations of the Ezekiel stories. We have computer animations in the meantime of the Vimanas of ancient Indian, etc. So that is one thing. Then I go into the old texts, into the old translations, including Encheduana, which I just met before, which is only available in German language at the moment. But including things like, are we the offsprings of extraterrestrials? You see, that's a long story. I have to make it shortly. We all believe that we are descendants of Noah. Noah, the survivor of the great flood. But nobody knows that Noah is the product of an artificial mutation. And I can prove this because these are texts which were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. No one in the United States knows it. And I put this on the screen. I say, look, it was made that way, and we have the text which can prove it. So it's all fascinating stuff with which I will come back to the United States.
And this is exactly why people are so excited to see you. 80 years old, you've been doing this for 64 years. Like you mentioned, 16 years old is when you first started to make the realization. What's next for you? And what's a website people can find for you?
I am always continuing. You see, so far I have published, at least in the German world, 36 books. Most of them, not all of them, are available in English. And for the moment, I am writing on another story. I am writing the story behind the story. During my life, I met so many scientists, brilliant people, by the way. So how have I come in contact with these scientists? What was the discussion? What did I not say in my books? Because they asked me, Erich, don't go to public with it, except I am dead one day. So I have the documents, I can prove it. So I write the story behind the story, how all this came together. I mean, 36 book to write 36 book, that's quite something in a short life.
Mr. Von Daniken, it has truly been a pleasure to speak to you. It always is, and I cannot wait to see you again and again do a follow-up interview down the line. If you have one message to all the listeners out there that look up to you, what would you have to say to them all?
Be prepared that extraterrestrials will return. They promised it to our ancestors, and every religion is waiting for the return of some gods. No gods will return, but extraterrestrials.
We have an unidentified flying object.